We are now going to pick up the pace dramatically. We are going to have a session that is led by Deborah Searcy, the joint CEO of Grace Blue Americas. It is different than that publicized. She is going to be having a conversation with Keisha Jean-Baptiste, whom you already know. And she's also going to be interviewing Ali Sable, the Global Talent Director at Anomaly. Ali's been in this role for a year, and as I know, has already brought enormous insight and original thinking to this role. Let me give you a little bit of background about Deborah. Deborah's been in advertising for 20 years. She's worked exclusively when she was on the agency side with founder-led creative agencies, which gives her a very particular insight. And when she's not at Grace Blue, she sits on the AAF's Mosaic Council, which is an industry-leading think tank on issues of diversity and inclusion. I know from my own experience that Anomaly is one of the most innovative thinkers about talent that you can imagine. And so I'd like to welcome Deborah and Keisha and Ali to the stage.
I wanted to bring up a couple of interesting facts that I think I'm fairly educated about diversity and inclusion, and I found a couple of new things. You guys may know this. But I think it's important to start this out with a little bit of level setting about where this industry is and where it needs to go. So the first thing is that it's interesting. I found this study with Deloitte, and they did a study in 2017. And it says that multicultural leaders are 2 times more likely to reach their financial goals. Multicultural leaders are 6 times more likely to anticipate change and respond effectively. These are a couple that I know you guys already know, which is companies are 15% more likely to outperform their competition when diversity and gender diversity specifically is present in their workforce. And they're 35% more likely to outperform their competition when multicultural diversity is in place. And finally, one that I think will arm you guys when you go back to talk to your leadership. I had no idea, this is fascinating. 50% of everyone under the age of 34 in the United States of America is multicultural. So it's really important for you to understand where your business is going. I think this room defines the future of the industry, and I think that's a great privilege and responsibility for all of you, that in a business where ideas are what we commercialize and sell, you guys are deciding where those ideas come from and what those people look like, what they believe, what their point of view is. So I think that's a great responsibility. And we're here to help you with a direct, honest, perhaps a little vulnerable, since we're doing this for the first time in a while, conversation. We want to arm you with some ideas to go back and kind of lead this conversation today with some ideas that you can take back to your leadership team and help put this in place. Notwithstanding the fact that all of you guys are leaders, so you guys are the ones making the decision about where this industry is going to go in the future. Keisha originally asked us to talk about strategies and techniques to source, engage, and transition new talent into companies. We're still going to cover that, but we're going to cover it from a unique perspective, which I think is culture. So not only did I come from very values-led, culture-first businesses in my career before I started at Grace Blue, and we are still that way today at Grace Blue. Keisha came most recently for Wieden Kennedy, and then Ali is currently at Anomaly. And I think these three, the companies that I represented in the past and currently represent at Grace Blue, as well as these two, are the epitome of values and culture-led businesses. So I think that we come from a good place, which is lucky for us, and that we're able to affect this with leadership support. But we want to talk to you guys a little bit about how to bring in that culture and be able to not only be a leader of people, but imbue that culture as you get into multicultural diversity and inclusion. The first thing I want to talk about is the definition of diversity. And I think in the past we've been quite narrow in our view of diversity. I know I'm an executive search consultant, and many of you in this room that I know of here that I can look at and see, won't call you out, have asked me for female shortlist. You want shortlists that are all women. I'm not going to give you that, just like I'm not going to give you a male-only shortlist. But I want to talk about the diversity definition and expanding that past the most visual representation, which is race and gender. So how do we change that around socioeconomic status, education, background, cognitive diversity, really try to expand that. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about how can we manage that difference? How can we, I know Ali, you talked about this recently, the culture of Anomaly breeds this inclusivity. How do you define that definition by expanding it within not only where you find people and multicultural people, but different backgrounds.
Yeah, sure. So I'm only a year into the role, so I don't know much, but I'll share everything that I've got. It was easy for me in one respect because the fundamental principle of Anomaly is not to orbit a channel, so therefore not to have a bunch of PR people who are there predisposed to recommend PR solutions to our clients, but rather put our client's business problem at the center and surround it with a really wonderfully diverse group of people in background, in skill set, in mindset, et cetera. So that broader notion of diversity was already kind of ingrained in the company. And that might include someone who comes from a client background, that might include someone who comes from a fashion background, a few people who come from agency backgrounds. So that broader notion of diversity was already embedded in the company. And I think we weren't as focused as we could have been on the more literal meaning of diversity, which we're talking about more and more today, which we are now. But because we had that fundamental principle, it was already somewhat ingrained in how we thought and how we sought out talent for our agency.
We're going to get to how do you keep them, but I want to talk a little bit about, and obviously, Keisha, you have some insight as well. How do you find them? I know there are two ways of getting to this. You know, automation and AI is the big talk right now, data. How are you going to pull it in? How are you going to judge people? I know we're doing our own project around automating research and pulling in sourcing data from all over the place and applying an AI filter to that. There's that option and that way to go about it. Then there's the human part of it, being present, having that proximate distance to your talent that you need to bring in. Can you talk about both of those?
I actually, just to go back just a second to the definition of diversity and to get to your question, I actually think that part of our challenge today is that we have not been truthful about what diversity really means. I think that we've allowed for a level of comfort to sit in, to say that diversity can be all of these things when it means nothing. And until, to me, we're dealing with the most visible and the most present form of diversity, which is how you show up in your skin and your identity, then you will never get to having a diverse workforce. And so for companies, and there are many of these, some of our agencies, some of our clients who hold on to this notion that diversity of thought will get you to that end goal. And I will say, no, it won't. It will not. The thing that will get you to that end goal is recognizing that race, gender, all differences, but starting with race and gender primarily, will lead you to the greatest opening of, and the kimono, quite frankly, of diversity. So my challenge would be to go to the textbook definition, because all the other things don't do anything. I will also say, just, I mean, maybe I'm feeling a little bit more energized from the nap, but I will also say, and I'm sorry if I'm being offensive to any one of your companies who are on the A list, but come on. How did we get to a list like that? We got to it by excusing the diversity definition. So we can't do that anymore. Diversity purely means difference. I will not look at a room with the same race, same racial makeup, and if you're all of the same color and look at that as diverse. That's not it. So that's just, I had to add on to that question. I think the second thing, though, is an interesting one, an Anomaly, and several agencies have this place of truth in your culture, whereas when you have a founder and leaders who are really connected to what you do for business, and they pull that through in how they engage clients, how they engage on the culture, your values, you really don't have to do a bunch of, I don't know, like BS talk when it comes to finding talent. But the reason I said this about diversity in the definition is because how you find them has everything to do with how you recognizing who they are and what different looks like. So the other, I guess, principle that I've held is that you've got to go to the communities. You can't find people in the same places that you're used to, because the same places that you're used to recruiting are going to turn up the same type of people. You go to the communities because those communities exist. They are generally defined by sameness in the same way that the dominant culture has their community. But you can find people of color, you can find women, and all these communities absolutely exist. But if you have not stated with intention that that's what you're after, you will always miss it.
So
Totally
to
agree.
lead on to that, communities all over the place. Where do you go? I know when I was talking, when Daisy and I were going to discuss this, she had talked a little bit about going to hackathons, going to the neighborhood, being proximate to that talent and where they are. Go to mothers groups, understand where they live and how they operate. How do you guys both go about doing that? I want to arm these people when you leave. Where do you go?
So when we took stock of the actual diversity numbers, we recognized quite a few areas where we were in really bad shape and we needed to improve. And we had a really thriving referral program, which, if someone from Anomaly knows somebody else, there's a really good qualified lead. But the risk that Keisha mentioned is that that's just going to make you more homogenous, because the people that are top of mind for your referrals are the ones who look just like them, who worked right next to them at the same company, are the same age, come from the same background.
They're roommates.
So we've honestly just asked for help in a lot of ways. Ask Keisha for help. Ask the diversity and inclusion folks at your parent companies, like I ask for MDC for help. And then there's also organizations out there whose sole purpose is to change the future shape of this industry, which is, the audience that consumes our ads, and the diversity of that audience has far outpaced the change that we're seeing in the people who are making the ads. So there's organizations like MAPE. There's organizations like Marcus Graham, Minorities in Media, Lower East Side Girls Club. Those are just 4 of the people who we found a really good give and take relationship with, where I take a lot. I ask for their help. I ask for their alumni. I ask for leads on talent. And then in return, we do mentorship. We take on their interns. We offer them our agency space. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach out for anyone who you know who's in these types of organizations. And they're willing to help, because their purpose is to help people who don't have a natural path into the industry find their way there.
Yeah, you know what? I will do a little plug. There is a multicultural talent conference, or a talent fair in Atlanta. So if any of you happen to be in Atlanta and you want to find some remarkable students, hit me up and I'll tell you where to go.
I've been asked by some agencies, particularly in certain categories of a business like beauty, or what's another one that's come up? I think fashion was another one, that they were looking for a particular, they were looking to round out a team and making sure they had enough race and ethnicity as well as gender represented. And it's interesting, especially on the hair care front. In talking to one agency, I was like, social media has really, I think, changed the landscape of how you can hire, because there are so many groups, I don't know if there's another term for this, but there's so many groups and that you can belong to and follow, where you can see where those communities are. You can see who's writing. You could see who's posting maybe in artistic ways. You can see a level of creativity through social media in a way that we didn't really have that much, I think, access to, other than getting into a real engaged recruitment conversation. And so I think that, for those who are recruiting, use your channels, especially Instagram and Twitter. You will find, particularly, I think, people of color, there's an enormous following there, and you'll find so much talent if you're looking outside of your traditional sources.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even at the very executive level, which is what we deal with. I recently had a chief creative officer came in who is multicultural, who has a very robust Instagram feed. And while his work in the business might not be the level at which, not the creativity and the aesthetic of it, but the scale might not be what this client needed, they were open-minded because they were aware of his work via Instagram, so you're absolutely right. I'd like to move on a little bit and talk about inclusion. So bringing them in is obviously very important. I think we could talk for hours about that. But I think the inclusion part, you get them in, but you have to keep them. And I think there's this revolving door of talent that comes and goes from our industry and our businesses. And it's interesting because I think we bring them in for the magic that they have. But then, in many instances, we kill their spirit because we want them to fit in. We want them to be like everybody else. And I think that is something that we've got to really work on. How can we do that? I know one of the things that most inspired me over the past couple of years to get involved in this is your Courageous Conversations video and the program that you had at Wyden. Talk a little bit about that with us, about how that direct, honest, like no BS conversation really facilitates inclusivity. And then I'd love to hear from you about how that you bring it into the culture and you just make it a part of everything every day. How do you set that expectation with the leadership and basically skill up the leadership so that they expect this every day? And it's not a question you ask because of course it's happening.
Wow. So to go back to my time at Wyden and Kennedy, I mean, just in all honesty, when I walked into Wyden and Kennedy initially, I just thought it was going to be this nirvana. You know, I'd heard countless, speeches from Dan Wyden, articles written about his beliefs, and I thought that, I'd walk in and I'd feel like, you are here, and as a Black woman, that was something that, I didn't really carry it in and out of work with me, but meaning I left it at home. I left my identity at home when I went to work. And certainly what I felt at Wyden was that there was a willingness and a wanting to get to this extra layer of who I really am. But there are people at every company that have their own biases and beliefs, and I also have my own. So part of it for me at Wyden was, and I was in a role where I had to do something about it. So part of it for me at Wyden was, first I needed to take care of myself. And I needed to understand for myself where I sit racially, where I sit from a gender perspective, and what the influences are in my life that represent that, so that I could understand how to fully bring myself to work. I had never, until 2015, I kid you guys not, I had never, ever brought my full self to work. And it was because of the work with Courageous Conversations about race that I started to see that I can be all of these things in one space. And that I was also projecting truly what society holds, which is honestly a racist, environment around people of color who assimilate. So I had been assimilating for 15 years of my career and had not let go until 2015. When I met myself in 2015 as an HR director who could fully say out loud, and I did at this conference, I am a Black woman.
Yeah,
And that is me first. When I was in that place, I then understood how to translate that for other people, because I was going to be the one that had to talk about this workshop, had to talk about, the culture, and I needed to reflect it. I needed to do things that that were authentic enough for me to then say it back to other people. And so and while Dan Wyden and the leadership at Wyden and Kennedy had these beliefs, what they didn't know how to do was make it real. And so it was really through my ability to just translate that on a personal level that I then began to connect it out to the office, and then show people, if I'm willing to go there too, you can. And I literally would spend so much time talking to mid-level junior talent who's of color about their identity, and giving them a safe space to understand how that connects through the work, giving them a safe space to understand that those insights they hold on culture and their way of expressing that, or their way of not understanding what an idea was about and being a voice for that was a part of their role too. And so it really just began from started with me, and then person to person, and then the movement around that just was with rolling out Courageous Conversations. So race was okay to identify with. Race, not racism, but race, and understanding your racial background and ethnicity became an okay conversation to have, which helped people understand more so where the inclusion work needed to go.
So this may seem obvious, but you're Black. You're having a conversation with other Black people at Wyden and Kennedy. How do you guide and lead Caucasian or other cultures to not be scared of language, to not be scared of, not have this fear of offense with everyone? How do you coach other people? Because this audience is not that diverse. There are a lot of ladies, but we don't have a whole bunch of color in here.
Fine liquor does it.
Yeah, true. Good point.
Well, that was a test of resilience, because I also had to allow for, I was being offended as people were doing their sharing. And so what I had in the test of resilience was that I needed to operate with a little more of muscle, I guess I would say, and also vulnerability in the sense that, I would hear things and I go, oh my God, do you realize how that sounds? Like, oh, they're gonna be so happy, to see you because you're, in other words, you're Black. Or, oh my God, you're a woman, and and those things, I had to learn how to engage in the conversation so that I could stop that dialogue from happening, which meant that I had to be willing to take it on, one, but also there was some language that was really offensive to me personally. But the way that we connected through courageous conversations about race is that there's a protocol for how you engage in that conversation. And part of it is identifying where you are in a compass. And so I would remind people from a personal standpoint, as a Black woman, I feel, and then get into the conversation there, but then still get to a solution. So let me tell you how this sounds. What I also found is that, honestly, a lot of people aren't really that educated when it comes to culture. We do culture as a business, but we're really not educated when it comes to cross-cultural sort of dynamics. And so I think we all need to go back to school for that. And that's kind of where some of the work the Aaaa'S is gonna do soon.
It's interesting. There was a group that started on their own, did not come from leadership. Leadership didn't ask for anything or start anything. I think they wanted it, but they didn't action it themselves. But instead, passionate people started these groups on their own, and one of them was called Anomaly X Diversity. And they talked a lot about a phrase, cultural appreciation, which was trying to better understand another culture with curiosity and respect. And that has kind of boomed into this cultural programming that we have. And it's gonna sound token, but it's not. But we've had an awesome Black History Month we just completed. We're in the middle of Women's History Month. We have Pride Week, we have Hispanic Heritage Month, and those are just a couple of tentpoles throughout the year. But in doing so, I remember seeing Keisha's talk and actually taking pictures of it with my phone and bringing it back to the agency. We bring people in, we have panels, we have really fun events like musicians and artists. But then we also have tough conversations where we talk about the spectrum of gender identity, for example. We had someone who was brave enough in our company to stand up and say, I'm a drag queen. We've brought in a drag queen performer for the day, and then I'm gonna do a Q&A after, where people could ask questions like, how do you become a drag queen? During Hispanic Heritage Month, people could say, is it Latino or is it Hispanic? And oh God, I don't know the difference. Like, which one is it? And so I think after this program had gone on for a year, I asked a couple people who I trusted and said, are we doing this just to like feel good about ourselves, like that we had a great Black History Month? And someone on the heels of a Pride Week said to me, I don't mind people asking me questions about what it's like to be gay today. I just wish I didn't have to anymore. And so the steps that we're taking to help people in our company understand each other's cultures, like Keisha described, it makes the people who are in that culture feel respected, a little bit more understood, and then it's starting to be reflected in our work. And then our work is now shaping culture, and then that becomes a fulfilling circle, which I think is what proves that it's worth it and proves that we've got to keep going.
That's absolutely right. I think that a lot of times you have your CEO or your global holding companies say, we need more diversity, we need more diversity, we need more diversity. And they have this very short-term look and view of it. It's like, okay, oh cool, you hired a lady, awesome. Yeah, check, did it. How can we imbue this long-term perspective on this? By affecting both our peers, folks below us, setting different expectations for where the industry is going to go, as well as the CEOs. How do we change them? I know that the obvious thing is attaching it to their career and letting them know some of those facts, like prove out the facts, that if we make this change, we are more successful. Not just because our clients are asking us to do it, because that's like, duh, you should have to do that. But how do you get them to change their perspective and empower them and try to take out that deep-seated, embedded, they don't want to do it, the unconscious bias? Are there any sort of tools that we can share that can then, these folks can go back and affect their leadership? and open their minds to different ways of thinking about it?
Well, I have two possibilities with this, and I don't know if they're absolutely right for every culture, but just because of the vantage point that I now have and working at the 4A's, I've spending some time with the numbers. Getting pretty familiar, in fact, with the workforce and the demographic changes over a period of 10 years. And I don't have that package to share with you guys, but what I will tell you is that not much has changed. And so when you look at the overall, all the people who are working in advertising, I think it's around 300,000, I might have this wrong, so don't quote me anywhere, but anyway, let's say it's 300,000 people. Our overall people of color and our gender stats have not really moved the needle. And so all that's happening is you're getting the benefit of industry-based programs like MAPE, that's been around for 45 years, 3,000 alum through that program. You're getting the benefit of the AAF's program, Most Promising. You're getting the benefit of Marcus Graham Boot Camp. You're getting the benefit of Ag Color Futures. You're getting the benefit of all these programs that exist to find and assist in bringing you the talent. What has not changed is that we have not reached a place where we're able to hold on or grow those numbers. So for me, this next phase and what you'll see more of from my team and I is just that. We got to get laser sharp on the numbers. And in fact, the other thing kind of within this is that we also need to learn how to look at data. So all too often, I've seen agencies report, companies, I wouldn't say just agencies, gender here and people of color here. And maybe if there's other ways of capturing data demographically, they might report it over here. But not often are we looking at them sort of cross-racially, across genders, and also with other filters in mind. And so, that's something that, one, we need to change, because until you know who you have, and what the makeup is, and until you have a snapshot, you really don't know what's going on. And so I think there's a leaky bucket that most leaders are not even aware is happening. And the continued refrain is, but I can't find anyone. That's just not true. And then I think the other thing is that, what can you do to influence? I think that we, I'm one of those HR people that just is, I want to get into the conversation. So I think that we need to skill up on having difficult conversations that might make us uncomfortable, but we need to become more brave and bold. Because to me, the conversation is super simple in that you're pointing out something that is factually a problem, right? And so whatever you need to skill up, if it's about cultural competence, it's about where to find, or just the data, my team and I can help assist. You have our organization for the 4A's, and you have many other organizations that can help with that. But that, to me, is an easy conversation. The hard conversation is, what are you going to do about it? So, but you have to be, I just find that too many people are not willing to start the conversation. So.
I don't have to convince my leadership to do it. They're chasing me for change as fast as we can make it happen. We stood up in front of the agency just last week to share our numbers boldly and say we really sucked in a couple of areas and we really improved. And that's not to say job done, but we've got to come back regularly and share those numbers so that they can hold us accountable for making sure that the change continues. I think the statistics that you started the session with, if you're having to convince somebody that this is important, hard facts and numbers that your business is going to be more successful, it's going to be more profitable. I mean, that's easy. And if you're from an agency, what I just described, which is our work is now more naturally reflecting the diversity of this country. And we're not falling into the traps of a lot of other people who are creating ads and communications, because I think we have a little bit better understanding of those cultures. And so we're not falling into those mistakes as much. And when your work does that, it influences culture, it's up for awards, so you can motivate your leadership that way too.
Yeah, I think we all know about, only one syndrome, which is where, I mean, I've been that person who's been trotted into a new business pitch because I'm a woman. I know a lot of you here who, if you've been involved in pitches, that has happened to you as well, being that only one. is both challenging. It also provides a great career opportunity for you if you are the only person in there because of your sex, your gender, whatever it happens to be. In some cases, your age. So I think that it's really important for everybody to not only recognize that only one that syndrome exists, and it also holds people back from being empowered. So they can't be the only one at the table. They can't be the only one in the seat. They have to have the accompanying opinion, and you have to be able to empower them to actually have that opinion. And I think that what you were talking about earlier about folks of color and other diverse elements not feeling welcome because they have to change themselves, I think being aware of that as leadership, which all of you are, we need to really impact that. We need to listen to that and go back and try to open up those conversations. And like I said earlier, not be scared of the language. You know, you need to learn what's offensive and what's not, for sure. But you also need to be able to go back and have that honest, direct conversation, because if we don't do it, if you guys don't do it, nobody's going to do it. Yeah. You're the ones who are bringing the people in. You're the ones who are ensuring that they're going to stay and impact this industry in the future. So I genuinely, a whole lot of responsibility on my mind.
I had, sorry, just one example actually to add to that. Something that we did at Wieden & Kennedy, speaking of the only one and looking at data, was identifying who the only ones are, what departments they're in, what level they're at, and identifying who the only ones are so that the management team and the heads of those teams were aware. Because that phenomenon is one that I think we should acknowledge and understand. If you're not someone who is in that only one role, it's very empowering, I think, when you start to see, oh my God, look at all these only ones I have here, 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 and here. And I mean from race, ethnicity, age, and gender. Like it changes the context in which you're understanding that person's contribution. Plus, one of the fascinating things that our former ECD said once he saw the data, he said, our job is to make those 2+. Like that's the only job. And he said, and because we identified where there were none, literally 0, he said, and we need to turn those zeros to 2. Because being the only one is no longer acceptable. Like, so that's another way, again, like if you're really into the data and decoding it in a way that makes sense, makes it tangible for your leadership, it brings, I think it may bring, insight in a very human way, as well as in a very kind of, factual, pragmatic way to the conversation.
That's a great idea. And it's easy, right? Like just look, point it out, and go from 1 to 2. That's a tangible, easy thing that you can do across.
Speaking of going from 1 to 2, and I read a lot of facts over the past few days, and one that I found fascinating, at least in my line of work, and I think for all of you who are in many cases accepting shortlists from Grace Blue, if you have one person of color on a candidate list amongst everyone else of a different color, it is factually 0% likelihood that that person is going to get hired. That's really interesting. But if you have 2, you have, I think it's 79% more likelihood that someone of a different gender will be hired. And if you have 2 of the same, this is odd, 2 of the same gender, so for example, you have 4 people who are Caucasian, and you have 2 who are black, you have 179% more higher likelihood of one of those 2 people of color being hired for the job. So again, that's something simple that you can do. It doesn't sound simple to find them. Where we're going to find them, but if you just demand that, you're going to get it. I promise. I know we're going to do it.
And on that same thing, another, in the vein of just sharing really tactical, useful tips, you can go out and read about unconscious bias, or you can go to unconscious bias training, and in most of that, you'll learn specific steps to do in the hiring realm, meaning making sure that you distribute the job description beforehand, so people are making decisions not based on, oh, they sound like me and we went to the same college, so like obviously they're going to be good for this job, but rather what the task at hand is. So that's just a really quick and easy thing to do, and ensure people who are hiring are going back and looking at that job description and making their decisions based on that, not based on whether or not they'd like to have a drink with them at a bar.
Yeah, absolutely, because hopefully you want to have a drink with them anyways, because they're cool. But it's one of the things you guys can also take away is go back, I'm not going to go into the detail on it right now, but go back and look up the hiring process to get hired at Amazon, because the way that they go about doing it, it's called the Loop. It's a very specific process, and it hires people to work at Amazon, not for a job. at Amazon. It hires people to join that company and that culture. And if you go back and look at that, you can apply some of it to your own company, and I think that that will help very much weed out unconscious bias. Finally, one question that maybe each of you can answer in one answer. It's kind of a bit of an elephant in the room. In everyone's here role of either doing recruitment or managing folks once they've been recruited, to try to emphasize inclusivity, it's really difficult to get at that during an interview. Because you don't want to be the person who hires that person who the next person on Diet Madison Avenue is going to be that lady or that man, usually the man. How do you what's a question that you can ask them during the interview process? Or is there a stream of questions that you can ask them during the interview process to try to get into that bias against inclusivity?
You mean avoid candidates who you think?
Yeah. So, well, you don't know. So everybody here is
out?
interviewing so many people every day, and particularly in the level that we deal with, which is executive level. You know, it's without doing a ton of confidential referencing, it's really hard to get to that answer. Like, are they just interviewing well? Do they seem really cool? Or are they secret predators? So how do you get to that point? Like, you don't know. Yeah.
I love
It's true. So how do you guys, I know that we deal with it every day, and we have our own way of going about trying to suss that out. But do you guys have any suggestions on these folks about I'm not just talking about the predatory part, I'm talking about inclusivity overall. Mm-hmm. How do you get someone, how do you judge whether or not they're going to be open to that long term? Because all of these companies need it and they all want it.
I mean, off the cuff, because wow. I think when you ask situational questions, you know, tell me about a time when, I think, and if we're not doing this, if you're not doing this yet in this category, in this space, I would highly suggest you start, because I just am a firm believer that cultural competence has to be a skill that we get some muscle in, and I think there's a way through asking about situationally, what have you done, what if this presents itself. I think for leaders, there are tons of questions that are just around the conflicts, you know, and seeing their thought process. It might not clue you in exactly, you know, but you'll understand a little bit in terms of like the words they use. I think language is key, and it gives you a sense of how they think. How a person thinks. You can also start to see where values lie. Like, so what is the first or second thing or third thing that I mentioned in my train of thought? You know, what will give you a sense of emphasis, you know, that person has on, or priority that person may have on each of those things. But I do think we need to ask questions that not to make people feel like the spotlight is on doing something wrong, but more about equipping them and showing that you value conflict, mediation skills, that you value, and that people understand and have respect and appreciation for culture. You have to ask those questions out loud and without spoon feeding it in your own words for your own culture. So, I don't know.
I mean, I don't think there's a magic answer.
Oh no, there's not.
I think making sure that everyone in the company is well versed in the values of your company, back to the beginning of our conversation, so that they can look for like-minded people, but that's not foolproof. When people come in and they are wrong, I think you've got to address it right away. I mean, absolute zero tolerance for anything like that. And not shuffling someone around who might be a problem, or kind of mildly addressing it with a verbal feedback, but being super direct, nipping it right away, and having a zero tolerance policy on anything like that.
Thank you for that. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for being patient with the last minute change.
Thank you.